welcome to a new episode of Melt. I'm Ritvika Gupta reporting from my home. This week, we are continuing our coverage from ZMelt 2020, which took place earlier this month as a virtual and global conference. Today, we are going to present highlights from an interview by Anant Rangaswamy, editor of Melt, with Sir Martin Sorrell. Sir Martin Sorrell is the founder and executive chairman of S4 Capital, which is building a purely digital advertising and marketing services business for global, multinational, regional, local clients, and millennial-driven influencer brands. Sir Martin was CEO of WPP for 33 years, building it from a £1 million shell company in 1985 into the world's largest advertising and marketing services company. Today, Sir Martin will be sharing his thoughts on how COVID-19 is changing businesses and the opportunities the pandemic has brought about. Let's have a look at the conversation. We apologize for the patchy stream. Let's get ready to melt with Sir Martin Sorrell.
Because of the lockdown and the pandemic, I thought it'd be good to get your view on what are the biggest challenges for marketers today, rather than for publishers or for intermediaries or whatever. What are the biggest challenge for marketers?
Well, obviously, when I talk to you, Anna, I like to promote my own interests, and you know that.
And you're not allowed to say S4 Capital, Media Monks, WPP. All these are not allowed.
I will just use the core principles around S4 Capital. So they were, purely digital because that's where the growth is. The holy trinity of data and digital creative and digital media programmatic, faster, better, cheaper, and a unitary structure. Now that faster, better, cheaper, when you say to me, what do marketeers focus on? What do they worry about? When they go to bed at night, when they wake up in the morning, what do they worry about, at least from a business point of view? I think it's the faster, better, cheaper thing. That sounds sort of very glib and it sounds flippant, but in the 2 years it's less than 2 years that we've been building S4, those three things. Faster means agility, and that's the key corporate attribute. To pivot, if you're an analog company, you're a technology company that started with a clean sheet of paper, just like S4 Capital did a couple of years ago, but technology companies obviously 25 years ago started. Their need for agility is probably less, but the analog companies, the need to pivot. You mentioned WPP. I mean, that's a classic example of an analog company that has an albatross around its neck, i.e. the traditional media. In India, where the traditional media is still dominant, but worldwide now, globally, digital is more than half the market. So agility is number one, I think, Anna, to your question. Better means understanding the new companies. This is Zmelt, sponsored by Facebook. So I'm talking about
supported by Zoom,
and by Zoom. But we come on to it. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, TikTok, big issue. What will happen to TikTok in India currently? But a key platform. So those six: Apple, Microsoft, IBM, SAP, Adobe, Salesforce, Oracle, Twitter, Snap, Pinterest, Spotify, Netflix, LG, Samsung. What all these companies, better means understanding all those. There are 20 companies I think I've mentioned. Understanding them you mentioned Zoom. You could add those to the list too. Understanding them in a balanced way. That's what they have to. What CMOs, CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, chief sales officers have to do. And then lastly, cheaper means not ZBB anymore. I don't think zero-based budgeting really has the traction that it had before, because what it did was put pressure on innovation and branding. It reduced spending in innovation and branding. And I think that hurt a lot of companies. And now the emphasis on efficiency is much more balanced. Marketeers lost control after 2008. They lost control when there was that pressure on costs. They lost control of the marketing process. The digital world forces them to take back control. This is just like the analogy to the Brexit voter in the UK who wants to take back control from the EU. That's why Boris Johnson won that referendum, or that the Remainers won, because there is a control issue here. And marketeers lost control. They thought the platforms would give them more control with the consumer. They thought they would wrestle control from Walmart and Tesco and Carrefour, but actually Amazon and Alibaba and Tencent, and in your own country, I guess now, platforms like Geo and the platforms that Mukesh Ambani are building at a retail level too, which I noticed, he's reinforcing recently, mean that relationship direct to the consumer becomes even critically more important. So, if I give you a good example, Mark Pritchard, I think at Procter & Gamble is doing an incredibly interesting job, and good job, because Procter are doing extremely well, up 6%. Like-for-like sales growth, which in the CPG category is very, very strong. Why? Well, they got out of the food business. That helped, and that was what A.G. Lafley did, I think, many, many years ago. But they focused on first-party data. They have 1.2 billion or 1.3 billion profiles of consumers. They're looking at how they can produce content on a 24/7, always-on basis, and they're pumping it out using the best technology, programmatically, whatever it happens to be. So it's like our Holy Trinity model. That is the new paradigm. That is the new dynamic. That's what we call the new age, new era model. So I think, I know it's glib, and maybe, my colleagues at Firewood, the agency that we brought into Media Monks a few months ago, based in Silicon Valley, they call it speed, quality, value. That's probably a little bit more elegant. But those issues, that phrase, no matter how glib it sounds, faster, better, cheaper, encapsulates, in my view, what everybody is worried about. And just one other thing, structurally inside companies, you have to bring together three functions. You have to bring together the sales function, the marketing function, and the IT function. And coalescing those three functions, is a very difficult thing to do, but they all now interweave into one.
Right. So how do you see marketing, companies changing their structures to suit the post-pandemic reality that we're facing?
Well, but yeah, they have to become more nimble. They have to become more agile, and it's a terrible thing to say, but the pandemic gives them the excuse. I call it a burning platform. I've called it an activist investor. I mean, in a sense, the pandemic, everybody talks. Satya Nadella was the first, I guess, to talk about it in this way, but talks about the compression of time. The most common phrase I hear is a CMO or a marketing or CDO, Chief Digital Officer, saying, I'm implementing our 2024 program in 2021 or even 2020. So change agents inside companies are much more capable now of ensuring very significant change. I mean, we've seen a tremendous change in the dynamics. The speed with which companies are now responding, they've been given the excuse. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say because the pandemic has caused such misery and has killed, the count is almost 900,000 people worldwide, probably more because the statistics are defective. But it's a terrible thing to say, I know, but what it's done is got organizations out of the rut that they were under. I mean, if you were running what I call an uncontrolled listed company, where managers were running companies, on average they last in the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500 for 17 years. The average CEO in a company like that lasts for 5 years. From 2008 through to about 2018, 19, you grew your top line. GDP growth was about 2 or 3 or 4%. You grew your top line in line with GDP. You had very little inflation, so you had very little pricing power. So you cut your costs, you bought back stock, and you could increase your EPS by about 5 to 10% a year. That was a suitable legacy. That was okay. The pandemic has just blown a hole through that strategy, or that complacency, if I can put it that way. And Q2's been a disaster. Bank earnings off 50%. Look at the ad holding companies.
Right.
It's carnage. Look at WPP writing off 2.5 billion. I mean, it's absolute carnage. And so what do? You rebase. And the change agents inside the companies have got much more airtime now. And CEOs who complained, who said, we want our businesses to be agile, now have almost the perfect storm and the ability to push through change much more rapidly. Now, sadly, I think we're going to see this in the UK when the furloughs come off at the end of October. The government subsidizes,
right?
But essentially we didn't have to. But most companies took in the UK 80%. The government paid 80% of the salary. Now that stops at the end of October, and it will be carnage again. Because I think we will see very significant unemployment in the UK unless the government continues the furlough program or does other subsidy programs. So they postpone the evil day in a way. But what's happening inside companies is, and I'll put it bluntly, they're using the COVID as an excuse to get the job done. Right. And they are moving much quicker. So I think those are the issues at the top of the agenda. And of course, in the new world that we're in, Anand, speed of response, that holy trinity model is really an election type model. It's like the models that political parties use in elections. You look at the data, you create content, you pump it out, you see how the electorate responds, and depending on their response, you tailor. So Netflix, it's what I call the Netflix model. I mean, Mark Pritchard at Procter & Gamble has really taken the Netflix model, in my view, and applied it, I think, pretty brilliantly in a packaged goods situation. And I think other companies will follow that route.
You also see some rogue decisions made by managers who run amok because of what they're licensed to.
No, I don't know about rogue decisions. I think you will see more flexibility. Interesting. That's an interesting question. I think you will see more wiggle room and flexibility to get things done within a framework. In other words, I think, one of the things that with fragmentation and nationalism and populism, one of the things that people are talking about, should they loosen the reins and should there be more freedom? And there is no contradiction between the model that we're building at S4 and that, because you can have the flexibility. The great thing about the technology is you can have the flexibility. When we produce for Netflix, Narcos 3, we produce 1.6 million potential creative executions. Now you can choose any and every execution that you need locally for that. So you get, with the technology, you get variability. You don't get, even if you go to more centralization, in a way you get more flexibility to operate at a local level. So the technology enables you, because of its nature, enables you to be much more flexible. So I don't think you'll get rogue decisions. I think you'll get a lot more experimentation. I think if John Maynard Keynes was still alive, to talk about the marginal propensity to experiment. That has gone through the roof. I mean, what we're seeing is huge experimentation. When I say take back control, marketeers are also experimenting. Again, using Pritchard as an example, he talks about having 300 experiments going on at Procter at any one time. I spoke to the consultancy that was helping Procter on their experimentation. It was really interesting. I mean, they are building ways for companies to experiment, particularly analog companies, with new ideas. I mean, the big issue for analog company, you experiment with a little idea and it's a pimple in the context on the elephant's backside. Yeah, so so scaling it is really the issue. But I think more importantly, companies are experimenting to a degree that I haven't seen before, and they have the license. And the best way of putting it is they have the license to do that.
Will this situation also throw up new entrepreneurs with new ideas in almost every category?
No, I think it will do. And I think, out of disruption comes opportunity. I mean, I know that our industry is in a dire state. We have Forrester talking about the holding companies firing. You and I were talking, and you were saying that in most of the agencies in India, there has not been a tremendous sort of pressure on headcount as yet, and that's good to hear. But generally around the world, Forrester is predicting the holding companies will fire 50,000 people. WPP fired 5,000 people in the first half of the year, and sadly, it's got into a debate of whether the old people, like me, were being fired.
That's what I wanted to understand. Why are you still in the business?
I'm still in the business for three. I've expressed it as three reasons.
What's your age, Martin, right now?
75.
75. You're 2.5 times the average age at WPP.
That's what they claim it is. That statistic is a false statistic. It's been corrected. Sometimes they don't know the statistics that they put out or the veracity of them. No, look. I think this ageism debate that has erupted because of Mark Reed putting his foot in his mouth. I think that's a serious issue. It's a serious issue. I mean, and it's not just about WPP and ageism in our industry. I mean, I have to say, this is a harsh thing to say, but the British government, when they started off managing the pandemic, I remember I was in California at the end of January, and I called a guy I've known for many years who's a medical expert, and I said, "What do you think of this Wuhan thing, of this pandemic, this epidemic in China?" And he said, "No, it's very serious." And he said, I said, "Well, what's the implication of the UK?" He said, "Well, if you model it, and you model it on the basis of Chinese mortality rates, 300 to 500,000 people in the UK could die." Now, the British government, I think, knew about that. When we get the Royal Commission on what happened, why the pandemic was handled badly or whatever, because I think it was handled badly, particularly at the beginning. At the beginning, they were prepared to let herd immunity run. So I'm 75, I'm in the vulnerable group. So therefore, I was expendable.
Right.
And it's a sort of eerie comparison to companies. Companies, they look at their structures. The older people are paid more generally because they've been around longer. And so the natural thing is, well, let's get rid of the oldies and get in some new talent. And of course, that's bolstered by the conventional thinking, the conventional wisdom in inverted commas, that, to know about digital, you have to be young, that old people don't know about digital. So you have a procession. I mean, if I gave you the list of people at WPP who have been fired because they were seen as being too old and too traditional, no, it's a serious issue. It can't be brushed under the carpet. And there are people, I'm not saying that Mark Reed is ageist, but there are people inside WPP and outside it, and I talk to a lot of them, and I continue to do so, who feel that he is ageist. And I would say that publicly. And I think it's something that should be addressed.
Right.
And, I feel very strong. Now, from my own point of view, I'm not ready to play golf. I have my mother's genes. And as you and I both know, Anna, I'm in the process of trying to prove a point. So we will continue to do that.
So now we move from here to the Oracle, Martin the Oracle, and
I wish.
No, I must warn all our viewers that you're often wrong. So, but I want to get your sense of what's going to happen with Brexit. The deadline approaches, and then with the US elections, because these are the two sort of milestones.
Okay, I'll go out on a limb. On Brexit, I think they'll finally do a deal. They'll cobble together what is called a skinny deal,
right?
Because I think it would be disastrous if we don't have a deal. I think it'll be at the 11th hour, 59th minute, and 59th second, right? Probably around October. But I think they will do it. But it won't be a great deal. But I think they will have to get something done.
Right.
On the US election, I'll go out on a limb. Speaking to a number of people, they're not writing Trump off. And this law and order, I mean, we all abhor racism. We all abhor the senseless and brutal killings in the US. It's totally unacceptable. But the law and order, it was the old Nixon sure. platform. A vaccine, I saw a headline as I was just coming in here, that Pfizer will have their vaccine out possibly by early November. They've been talking about getting a vaccine out in the US on November the 1st. I think we'll have a vaccine generally distributed maybe in by Q2 of next year. So I'm very bullish on next year, Anand. We've got a lot of momentum at S4, as you'll see next week. I think we've got a lot of client momentum and conversion at scale coming, tempting providence, but I think that's going to happen. I think Q2 was the bottom. April was the bottom for us. We saw an acceleration in top line growth in May, June, and heavily into July. And if we get the client conversion, I think we're going to get. And then Q3 is going to be better than Q2 relatively. Q4 is going to be better than Q3 relatively. And 2021, when we have a vaccine delivered and driven GDP. I mean, Goldman's forecast for US GDP next year is up 6%.
Right.
So I think we're going to see a post-recession or a post-depression, pandemic depression surge. And if you look at the numbers now, they are peaking. I know that's difficult for me to say because obviously in Mumbai the situation is still serious, and the infections still rise, and obviously sadly the deaths still rise. But I think by this time next year we'll be in a very different position.
And that was Sir Martin Sorrell discussing the impact of the pandemic on the marketing landscape. Let's take a look at the Mel cheat sheet. Businesses need to be agile and push more in these uncertain times. The new era model is about using technology to push through change. The pandemic has allowed companies to get out of a rut and introduce significant change and disruption. Technology will enable enterprises to be flexible and connect on a local level. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Melt. You can watch the full session and all other recorded sessions on zmelt.com. The replays are available till 28 September 2020. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Our handle is Ready to Melt, and stay connected with our daily Melt update on our website readytomelt.com. I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Goodbye.